Is it about comfort and control or community and Christ? Let's talk about that on today's 10-Minute Talk. Hey everybody, welcome to today's 10-Minute Talk. My name is Pastor Jay Wentworth. I have the privilege of being the lead pastor here at Spirit of Life Church in Yakima, Washington. So the question was, is it about comfort and control or is it about community and Christ? You know, I heard this story the other day of this guy. He was on staff at a church, and every week he and his family would get pizza, and he would go to this local Papa John's, and he met this guy at the Papa John's, this worker at the Papa John's, and he, talked to him every week, and they became friends because he saw him every week, and began to just, talk to life about him. And the guy had a lot of tough stuff going on, and it was just a really hard season for him and his family, and he was working a whole bunch. And, it kind of looked like he never had different pants on. He always had the same clothes. He was just rough and tumble. Things were tough for him. And this church staff member really kind of took pity on him and really wanted to help him and really wanted to help him get to know Jesus. And so he invited him to church, and, the guy would say he's coming, and, he wouldn't show up, and he would again say he was coming and he wouldn't show up. And, this was a big church, so it's kind of nerve-wracking, 2,000 or 3,000 people. And I think the guy knew that because it was a local church. And he kept, saying he was going to come and didn't. And finally the guy said, hey, I really expected to see you yesterday and you didn't show up. The guy said, I know, you know what? I'm going to come tomorrow. And so the staff member decided he was going to wait for this guy in the lobby of the church. And so he waited, and then time for service came. And it passed, and he waited, and then 5 minutes later, still no guy from Papa John's. 5 minutes later, it got to about 15 minutes after service started. He said, you know what, I got work to do, I got to go in. And so, he went ahead and saw him the next week, and he said, hey, I really expected to see you at church this last weekend. And the guy said, well, actually, I came, I was there, but I never made it inside the building. And come to find out, the guy had pulled in the parking lot, and he had to work right after church. And so he just wore he also, didn't have any really nice clothes. So he just wore his Papa John's clothes. And when he pulled into the parking lot, the parking attendant of the church, a man in a three-piece suit, looked in the guy's car, and not a nice car, kind of a broken down little sedan. And he looked and saw the guy was wearing his Papa John's outfit. And he said, young man, I don't know what's going on, but this is God's house. And in God's house, we wear God's best. And the gentleman explained to the church staff guy that he parked his car and broke down in tears. Because that was all he had to wear. And he never came inside the church. Now, friends, to say this story irks me or upsets me is maybe one of the largest understatements I've ever heard in history. That is a table flipping moment if I've ever heard one. We don't just do that to new visitors. We do that to our family. We do that to our friends. We set the precedent on how God sees us and how God sees others. We are the example for that as Christians. And if we continue to put up this facade, friends, that it really matters that you dress nice when you come to church, that it really matters that you have to have everything put together when you pull in that parking lot, then we will continue to turn people away from Jesus and cause them to not be in eternity with us. We will continue to not be able to witness. We will continue to not be able to disciple. We will continue to diminish the power of Christ because of our preferences, because of what we're comfortable with and because we want control over what other people are doing in our church. Well, friends, I'm here to tell you first, it's not our church, it's His. So get over yourself. It's that simple. It's Jesus' church. He is the only one who dictates what people are and aren't allowed to wear, which He doesn't really dictate that much, what people are and aren't allowed to say. And guess what? We're about to review. Wearing God's best is one of those things you're not supposed to say. Because, friends, that was the best that God had for him in that season of his life. And I need you to remember that. There are going to be people you meet who look unkept, who look untidy, who say words that you can't believe they're saying. And in that season of their life, they may be doing the best they can with what God has offered them, considering the circumstances they've experienced in their life. And until you are willing to walk some steps in their shoes, how dare you say, here at God's house, we give or we wear or we do God's best. If that's your attitude, you're not God's best at that moment in time. You're one of Satan's soldiers. And that sounds super extreme, but friends, when you're turning people away from Jesus because you want things to be a certain way, that's exactly what Satan wants you to do. So let's dive into here. Romans 14, 1-3, it says, as for the one who is weak in faith, welcome him, but not to quarrel over opinions. One person believes he may eat anything, while the weak person eats only vegetables. Let not the one who eats despise the one who abstains, and let not the one who abstains pass judgment on the one who eats, for God has welcomed him. In short, what Paul is saying here is there are going to be people who walk with Christ differently than you walk with Christ. There are going to be young people who have holes in their jeans. There are going to be people who have piercings all over their face. There are going to be people with tattoos. And I am one of those. I have 4 of them. Now, if you read the scriptures incorrectly and you don't take context at all, you can go ahead and say that piercings and tattoos and holes in jeans are sins. You can say those things if you want. But if you really know your scripture, you'll know that's not the case. And I'm not going to dive deeply into those things right now. Now, you can be somebody who doesn't like those things for yourself, and you cannot do those things. And that's what this is talking about, the one who abstains. That's fine. And the person who doesn't abstain from those things shouldn't be judging you either, because they have nothing to do with the doctrine of the salvation and the resurrection and salvation and ascension and death and life of Jesus Christ. They don't affect that. They don't change that. They don't change that in their heart that person loves Jesus and loves everybody else and has grace and wants to fulfill the Great Commission and the Great Commandment to the best of their ability. People are going to do things differently. There are Catholic people who are going to go to heaven. There are, Methodists who are going to go to heaven. There are Presbyterians who are going to go to heaven. There are Anglicans who are going to go to heaven. But they all believe in Jesus. Now, they may do things differently, but they all believe in Jesus. Now, there are people in those denominations and in our denomination who do things traditionally that do not align with Scripture. And they go too far, and it becomes idolatry. I can't speak for them because idolatry is a sin. But there are people who genuinely have given their lives to Christ and have a heart for Jesus and conduct themselves differently than you ever would, and you might even find it offensive. Deal with it. It's not a sin, it's not offensive to me, and it shouldn't be to you either. It's only between them and God. Now, if there's a sin they're committing and you have a relationship with them and then you want to help them with that, then you gently rebuke them. Then you take them to a small group of people if that doesn't work, and you all talk to them, and then you bring it to the whole church. But in no way should you decide that something that's not in the Bible as a sinful behavior is a sin because it's something you don't prefer or something you don't like. Our focus is way off. And this stems so deeply into the church, and I know I'm going to go over my time, friends. But I will tell you as a pastor that 90%, and I mean 90% of the complaints I receive from people have nothing to do with sinful behavior, have nothing to do with things being theologically correct. Their preference. They're how people think things should be, or they're how people say things have always been. And what it's really about is I want to be comfortable and I want this to be my way. And it's about I want to control the narrative. Respect who has been called to lead the narrative. Now, first and foremost, the narrative is led by Jesus. But if Jesus has called somebody to lead the narrative, meaning how things are organized, how things are set up, they might not be how you do it. But get out of your comfort zone and grow your faith zone. You know, one of my favorite quotes is an older woman says to her husband, "Oh, I'm so glad we did songs that I didn't like this week, that were different than what I would prefer." And her husband was like, "That doesn't make any sense. Why would you prefer worship songs be not what you like?" And she said, "Because that means we're reaching people that are different than us. And we need that." And that's just it, friends. Diversity within the church is the hallmark of a healthy church family, where people can see things differently together. And as long as we're not living in sin, we can live with Jesus and each other in unity and build this colorful menagerie of all of God's creation. So stop worrying about these little things that have no scriptural or biblical bearing on how we work together as a church to reach the lost. Because at some point, those are going to push the lost away if that's what you focus on. Love you, friends. Have a blessed week. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.